that I'm not sure if is only unique to MIT, but it is a great quality that exists there. I feel that when you have that sort of community aspect, especially I think in undergrad we have really specific living groups, that community aspect means so much because you become so much closer to all these incredible people.
When you ask about a long-lasting impact, one of the recent publications our group did that I led was on developing the first safety analysis for nuclear ships. Another thing to consider for startups, at least from my point of view, is understanding the ecosystem you're driving at. And that's more of leveraging what previous people have done.
Academics, research in professional lives because of AI that are incredible. And I don't know if I personally think it's going to be taking away a lot of jobs. I feel like a lot of these software engineering jobs we've seen that are like being phased out are just being replaced with prompt engineering. So essentially another form of software engineering. Build your network in all sectors. You'll never know what you'll learn.
You'll not have a regret if you make a safe device.
Hello and welcome to the GIBS IRE Talks Podcast, powered by GIBS Business School, a place where innovation meets inspiration. And I'm your host, Dr. Pallavi Vyas, and I have with me two very amazing young professionals, straight from MIT to India, who are here to discuss with us about their experiences at MIT and what is it that makes the experience at MIT different for a person over there. They would also be sharing with us what are the different ways in which AI can become a friend or a foe for us, as well as what is it that students can do to become entrepreneurs and start up on their own. So let us hear from Anthony and Maya, who are straight from MIT and would be sharing with us their experiences and their journey so far. Hi Anthony, hi Maya. Welcome to the GIBS Business School and thank you for agreeing to do this podcast with me today. So since you've come from MIT all the way to India, we would like to know and hear about your experiences at MIT and how those experiences have shaped you what you are today. So I would just quickly ask a few questions and probably based on how you would like to take it, you may accordingly answer those. So my first question is, since you've spent all your years in the US and all your growing up years you've been there, and I'm sure you've been exposed to not just MIT but various other institutions or organizations in general as well. But particularly, what is it at MIT that has actually helped shape what you are today and how you take your decisions and how you do things? What do you think is the role that MIT plays?
Yeah, I think that MIT has a very collaborative culture. I think especially being a more research-minded university, there is such a great focus on collaboration, teamwork. You're always trying to make sure that everybody else succeeds. And I think that's something that I'm not sure if is only unique to MIT, but it is a great quality that exists there. Because I feel regardless in my classes and my work opportunities, in different clubs I'm in, the ability for collaboration and I think the genuine interest that all students want to see their peers succeed is something that has definitely been a great help for me in both my academic and professional life.
Okay, that's great. That's great. So do you also think that this collaborative approach that students and probably your colleagues at MIT that have, does it really also help you in solve your day-to-day problems or probably larger, maybe other kind of problems, maybe related to academics or otherwise? Do you really think there is any role of this collaborative approach to play there?
I think in day-to-day, it comes to more like fostering a better community. I feel that when you have that sort of community aspect, especially I think in undergrad we have really specific living groups, that community aspect means so much because you become so much closer to all these incredible people. I've had roommates who are building robots that they send to space, and these are just some of the great people I get to surround myself with. So I think especially when, for me at least, being an undergrad at MIT, the community and the amazing types of people I get to meet every day, I feel like that helps both on the day-to-day when it comes to just simple, whatever day-to-day work I have, also in academics, collaborating on group projects, or if we have a really hard assignment, knowing I can lean on my peers for help is really valuable.
Oh, that's great. That's really nice to hear about the kind of environment that you have at MIT. And I'm sure, like you just mentioned, that you have roommates working on a robot. So I think a lot of informal learning is also what you would have, right? Even if it is not directly related to what you're doing, but I'm sure a lot of it would.
Yes, like Anthony and I were both in pretty different fields. And so I feel like even in this experience, I'm learning so much from the other MIT students we're with.
All right, that's interesting. That's interesting. So, could you also share with me, maybe either one of you, is there any particular classroom experience or a lab experience or otherwise working on a project that has probably had a very long-lasting impact on you? So, not just with regards to what you're doing at MIT right now, but otherwise also, is there any such thing that has really impacted you in different ways?
Yeah, so part of my research work is with the MIT Maritime Consortium. So it's a collaboration between multiple different departments. So political science, we have mechanical engineering, we have nuclear engineering, we have the U.S. Navy has a program within MIT that we work alongside with as well. And what I do with that group is to do hazard and safety analysis for new technologies that are deploying in the maritime industry. So when you ask about a long-lasting impact, one of the recent publications our group did that I led was on developing the first safety analysis for nuclear ships, because a lot of emerging shipping companies, even those shipping companies in India, Korea, in the US, are all looking towards nuclear propulsion for the future. And then this was like one of the first documents that conducted this sort of research since the 1950s. So it was a big change, I think, that we provided to the entire maritime industry. And I think that would be a very long-lasting impact in securing a stable future.
Understood. I'm sure, because specifically when it comes to the developments that are constantly happening in the countries, I think that perspective is really very important, because your security, your safety, not just within the country, but your boundaries specifically is very essential. And now with AI and all that can happen with AI, I think it becomes even more important, isn't it?
Definitely,
yes. Yeah. All right. So, in your opinion, I mean, both of you have your own different experiences. In your opinion, when do you think it is the right time for a student to actually begin a startup? So, since we are discussing about innovation and entrepreneurship today in the program that we are conducting at GIBS, what do you think is the right time? When do you think a student is actually ready and prepared for a startup?
Honestly, I think that most students, anytime in their undergrad or postgrad years, are great times to start. I think it honestly depends more on the motivation you have. Because entrepreneurship is a lot about how can you communicate with people, how can you network, how can you convince people of your idea. And so I think it doesn't necessarily matter what time you do it at. It more so matters, do you have the motivation required to do it? Because I feel like we've seen startup founders who are uber successful when they're 17, and also startup founders who are like 45 and doing wonderful. So it doesn't seem like an industry where you need experience. It seems like an industry where your motivation is what matters most.
I'll provide a little different perspective here. So the another thing to consider for startups, at least from my point of view, is understanding the ecosystem you're driving at, and that's more of leveraging what previous people have done. Because there's a theory for entrepreneurs and startups that like breaking walls and breaking bridges, just to create new imaginaries, and that in itself has a theory behind it, right? You should develop more and innovate more, but it's important to understand why those bridges were built in the first place. And a lot of startups that I've seen, or innovators that I've seen, think that those bridges were there based off of some previous person who thought of something. And it's not necessarily a constraint, but then they step in 20 years later and they realize they really did need that bridge. And a good example of this is the recent Ocean Gate issue. So they were looking up, one of the issues there was that they thought they would burn a bridge or break a wall by using carbon fiber for their hull structure. And this was good because they were able to save a lot of money for creating submersibles. The issue there, though, is that carbon fiber does not go well with compressive force. And now we've seen the story of the Ocean Gate. So it's important to understand why those bridges exist.
Were actually there, were actually there in the first place before we decide to do something on it.
Correct.
Understand the history behind it or why it was there in the first place. Agree, understood. So since we're talking about startups and we're talking about innovation and all, what is your perspective on how important is funding for these entrepreneurs who are starting up on their own in comparison to having a problem solution fit? So how important does funding play a role here?
I think that funding is definitely something very important. One of the biggest topics I think entrepreneurs have to face the most is how do you communicate well to VCs, or how do you get funding from different programs or grants? And definitely depending on the startup ecosystems, these vary. So I'm more familiar with the US at least, but I think that having the ability to communicate well is something that you very much need. Oftentimes I feel like we have these VCs who come to speak to us and they're always telling us the thing that matters most about getting funding isn't necessarily your idea, even though that is an important part. Oftentimes it's the way the founders portray themselves. Are you the type of person who can be a leader? Can you be strong? Do you have the motivation that makes other people want to follow you? Or are you going to be very laid back and just let things flow? Because what the mindset of the founder is kind of what the ethos of the company is.
Agree. And I think that communication, why is it important, is because it kind of builds that trust that if I'm putting my money, I'm putting in the right place, because like you just said, an organization's ethos is dependent on what the leader speaks or does himself. So I think that connect in the first place is very, very important. All right. So since we're talking about the startup ecosystem, or we're talking about startups in general or entrepreneurs, we see a lot of talk around AI and what all can AI do to individuals or to organizations. So how important do you think is AI today in the startup landscape in general? I mean, what role do you think AI plays in today's time?
I think AI plays a pretty big role, and it's increasingly interesting. I wouldn't say scary, but interesting. It's allowing a lot more startups to develop and ramp up a lot faster. Developing websites is a lot easier. Discovering new technologies is a lot easier. For example, like all the new proteins in the medical sphere is a lot driven by AI. But I think on the other side, it's also interesting because you have other industries like aviation, automotives that are seeing AI and implementing it, because again, it's very easy to develop these new things, but it's hard for them to meet what sort of safety standards or regulations already exist. And that's concerning to both the company, because then they have the liability behind the technology they deploy. It's a concern for the governments, because they have to allow these innovations to develop, right? But they need to ensure that they protect the population. But then you also have the population themselves, and I think they may be the most harmed here, because they don't have the necessary power, to question or to accept the safeties behind this. So I think it's very effective in developing these new technologies, ecosystems, what have you. But I think it creates a lot more questions that need to be answered.
Yeah, I'm sure. So in fact, based on what you just said, the way AI has been changing the manner in which we work today, and I'm sure a lot of talks are already going on around it, but do you really find AI to be a threat for people or for their jobs, specifically maybe in your line of work that you do, or maybe in academics, the kind of exposures you have? So what do you think? AI is really a friend or a foe? Do you really think AI can help you in some way or the other?
Yeah, I think the main thing with AI is that it doesn't really replace learning, which I think is the sort of fallacy that a lot of students are falling into right now. If you Google something or ask AI to just do something for you, it doesn't replace the physical process of you actually learning how to do it yourself, which I think is something that students should be encouraged to do, because it's so important. You need to make sure that you're developing these skills. AI is wrong a lot of the time. How can you correct the inaccuracies if you don't know what's correct and what's incorrect? So in that aspect, I think you have to be careful with AI. Obviously, you shouldn't be doing all your learning on it. However, at the same time, personally, I think it acts more as a friend, because there are so many advancements you can do with it. The ability to create an MVP in a startup can take 30 minutes now, when it used to take weeks or months, which is incredible. There are so many technological advancements related to it. There are so many new things you can do in academics, research, in professional lives because of AI that are incredible. And I don't know if I personally think it's going to be taking away a lot of jobs. I feel like a lot of these software engineering jobs we've seen that are like being phased out are just being replaced with prompt engineering, so essentially another form of software engineering. So to me personally, I think it should be used carefully. Students shouldn't be relying on it, but it's definitely something that can be used for the greater good.
I mean, for me, I agree with mostly what you said. And for my line of work, I don't really see friend or foe necessarily, and I'll speak more towards that. I'm not too certain about the job stuff. What I see mostly is that AI is not necessarily a friend or foe, but I think it makes the learning rate a lot easier for doing challenging issues or resolving challenging issues. And because of that, it makes people have a false sense of confidence in a lot of their solutions they might do. For example, if you have a control system and you put AI in there, and it makes the control system a lot easier. You don't have to do all your like mathematical analysis for that. But it makes them believe that it will always work, and that's not necessarily true. And that kind of hits to what Maya's saying for like students. They might submit their paper with AI and think it might be completely correct, but it turns out like half their citations are completely made up. Right. But it's a completely different sense in the real world where you're actually deploying these solutions, and the solution's completely wrong, right? So imagine you're doing another space shuttle launch and you use AI for the trajectory mapping. And if the AI is even slightly wrong, but it's been right generally, you might not land in the moon, you might land in the sun, which is not a good place to be in.
Correct. So thank you so much for putting it so beautifully, both of you. In fact, I'm sure all of our viewers who would be who are listening to this or who would be watching this, I hope they specifically listen to what you both just said about AI, because even we experience the same thing in our in general in our academic experiences, that students who are smart, they know how to create a better assignment. Let's say, for example, those who don't necessarily know how to use AI, they may sometimes get derailed and not understand that, what solution AI gave, it was actually not even meant for you. Yeah, so I think somewhere your intelligence, like you said, that you cannot really eliminate your own physical self, because you have to put in your thought behind what exactly you want from AI. I think that kind of a clarity, that understanding you need to have, and then probably understanding whether it gave you the right solution. So there, I think your involvement, you cannot negate. So I would want to ask my next question, which is about innovation. So what do you think is more important for innovation? Is it some new technology or an idea, or is it about the mindset? What do you think is more important when we talk about innovation in general?
Yeah, I would definitely say, I think to me, I feel like it's a lot more about the mindset. I think something that even in college we talk about often is like the innovation mindset or growth mindset. I think when you're thinking about innovation technology, that's something that comes from like years and decades of research. You can't really substitute that. But when we talk about innovation and mindset, that's something that is much more accessible to more people. And we can see that in like all types of companies. There are so many companies out there that their entire premise doesn't really rely on a technological innovation. Their premise just relies more on a mindset change. I know like a big company in India, like Blinkit, that's such a great example of a company where you just see like this small little change in how they're operating, and it has this like huge dramatic effect, even though there's not really a technological innovation that goes along with it. So when we look at companies like that, to me, I think true innovation is more in mindset. There's definitely so much innovation to be had in technology, but that's like a decades-long process, years-long process, versus some innovation mindsets, which is a lot more easily achievable for most people.
Correct. So I think when you talk about the innovative mindset, it also kind of sums up an individual being able to identify a problem which probably others couldn't see.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's not really about building a new technology, but then a smallest of problem. You gave example of Blinkit. So smallest of your problem of, let's say, grocery being delivered to your doorstep, somebody identified it and created a business out of it. So I think, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So moving further, we've been talking about AI and we've been talking about how AI helps or does not help or whatever. In your line of work, particularly, Anthony, you talked about risk and you talked about mitigating risk and all those research and study that you're doing. How is that risk different from engineers in comparison to what it is for management people, like people from the management side who take decisions? How do you define risk in your
Yeah, so what I generally see whenever I engage with business students or businesses is that the focus is largely on the economic profits. And you have the cost benefit based off of whatever you sell, and the risk there is whether or not your product sells. And in of itself, it makes sense as a business, you have to make sure you're still profitable. When it comes to a lot of the engineering work and a lot of technology, there really becomes a different risk. And this really does apply here when it comes to AI specifically, given that it's a brand new technology a lot of businesses are using. And that's the actual consequence behind the use of the technology. So you had the 1950s, you had nuclear reactors, right? India developed the first nuclear reactor, and India developed its own nuclear reactor, and they had to deal with its population, right? They had to negate any fallout damages, radiation protection, and these were risks that businesses generally didn't have to deal with, right? Because as a business, you don't deal with people dying potentially from your technology. But when it comes to AI now, you're going to see, I'm seeing something similar to what we saw back in the 50s with nuclear technology, where a lot of these companies are deciding that we need to deploy AI or develop AI or put AI somewhere in some technology. But the question becomes how to make them maximize profit and using AI behind that maximizing. When it comes to engineers and the engineering mindset is, what is this changing within my system? And how is it changing in my system? And the consequences behind that. And that makes it a little more different, becomes a question of liability and long-term sustainability. And this really changes how one views a product or technology. That the technology doesn't become like a short-term gain or a monetary profit, it becomes a lifelong ecosystem. And how can we maintain that for a sustainable length?
All right, that's great. That's great. So, moving further, I have my last question to either one of you who would like to answer that. Since we're talking to students today, and we're looking at what the students are doing with regards to their projects and assignments and work that they're doing with regards to innovation, research, and entrepreneurship. So, if I were to ask you, how do you think students can start their own ventures, even when they probably do not have any basic funds available with them, or they have very limited resources, given today's times wherein, people need to be agile and need to be really fast with their decision making, or probably quickly grab an opportunity if it is available? What suggestion do you think you have, or how do you think students can actually initiate something of their own, even though they may have very limited resources available?
Yeah, I think the thing that I think about most when I think about entrepreneurship is definitely networking and community. I think that obviously this is a time we have to be very agile, very quick. If you find a problem, get to it immediately. But I think maybe you're not finding that problem. The best thing you can do in that instance is to really build out your network. Meet people who are finding problems. Meet people who are also starting other ventures. Meet professors or researchers who are doing something really interesting. To me, I think that's the easiest way without funds or without anything like technical you need to actually have. When you're expanding your network, meeting all these new people, you can find out more ideas, and from there, broaden your experiences, learn more, and then figure out what you want to work on. I think for me, that's been the best advice I've been given, and definitely something I think all entrepreneurs should be aware of.
I was thinking something a little more differently, but to add on is understand like the 1 degree shift, understand what the real problem is. Because you see a lot of startups and entrepreneurs pushing new ideas, new innovations, but they don't necessarily have a problem. They create an artificial problem in many instances. And for that, it makes it a lot harder for a lot of these startups. But if one looks at like what is the real issue or what's a hidden issue and gets a very good concrete problem, it's a lot easier for the startup to go through.
All right, that's great. That's great. So to sum it up, if you would have one line of advice, each one of you, maybe one line of advice you would like to give to today's students, or in general the young community, what would be that one piece of advice, maybe from you based on your experiences all throughout up till now, and maybe one line of advice from you?
Build your network in all sectors. You'll never know what you'll learn.
All right, that's great. Build your own network. Wonderful. How about you, Anthony?
You'll not have a regret if you make a safe device.
All right, that's great. That's great. So thank you so much, Maya and Anthony, for being with us today for this IRE Talks podcast, and it had been wonderful interacting with both of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So as we come to a close, I thank our experts, Ms. Maya and Mr. Anthony, for sharing so many insights with us today. I'm sure with the sharing of knowledge that they did with us, I'm sure you are very clear that it is very important to have your own network. It's very important for you to identify the right people, make sure that you are building on that network, make sure that you are very agile and active so that you can pick a problem and see how you can provide solutions to that. Apart from that, it is very important to understand your own risks, understand how AI can become friendly, understand what is it that AI can do to your line of work, and put in your human touch and your element into it. Like rightly said by Maya and Anthony, you cannot really eliminate your physical self from AI when you're finding solutions from it. So thank you so much for being with us today. I'm sure you had a great learning experience with us. Until then, goodbye. See you in our next IRE Talks podcast session. This is your host signing off from today, Dr. Pallavi Vyas. And please do follow us on our various social media handles @GIBS Business School, @IRE Talks Podcast. I'll see you very soon in our next podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.